Welcome in to another edition of the JMU Sports News Podcast. I am Bennett Conlin, joined by Jack Fitzpatrick. Jack, we saw the Dukes win a game.
We could talk about that, or we could just talk at length about Ben DiNucci signing to the XFL Dragons. I was thinking we could just talk exclusively about that huge signing coming out of Seattle today. But if you want to talk about JMU beating ODU in a complete dominating fashion, I'm down to do that too.
Yeah, originally I thought they were just the Dragons. And then I saw they were the Sea Dragons.
They used to be the Dragons. In XFL 2.0, they were the Dragons. And now in XFL 3.0, they're the Sea Dragons.
That's confusing. But congratulations to Ben DiNucci for being a Sea Dragon.
We all grow up wanting to be a Sea Dragon, and I'm glad his day has come. But yeah, we went to the ODU game this last Saturday down there in Norfolk and watched JMU absolutely obliterate the Monarchs from start to finish. Todd Centeio played a fantastic game, but I don't know if we necessarily want to get too far ahead of ourselves talking about that game when we have some really important information to bring with you guys.
We have a Harrisonburg exclusive 3-notch beer drop on Friday. Sweet potatoes casserole. I'm a little skeptical, but I'm looking forward to trying it out and seeing how it goes, right? I think it'll be pretty good.
It drops Friday when we're there. The first day it's on tap is when
we're going to have to try it. Now, do we try it with us each getting one? Or
no, we get a flight and we put it in the flight.
That could be an option as well, sure. That would make a lot of sense. I do think their second deal here, scrolling across our screen, is pretty darn exciting, though. Every game day, you'll have exclusive $5 Duke of Clouds. Good beer, good price. Can't really complain about that. So I'm stoked about that. Interested, highly interested, sweet potato casserole. So I'll give it a shot, right? I don't want to be too much of a skeptic here.
Yeah, we'll tweet our breakdown. And also with mention, I think Duke of Clouds is their play on Emperor of Clouds. We went to the Richmond tap room with 3-notch here. Emperor of Clouds was fantastic. So I imagine Duke of Clouds is something similar.
In that, yeah.
But just slightly different. Probably like a different hop. Like instead of Citra, they use Mosaic, or instead of Mosaic, they use like Galaxy. Those are the three hops I know off the top of my head.
Beer dork.
And then another dorks is that BetOnline is here and basketball is back. And BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs. This basketball season, you'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. And as your continued source for all sports wagering information, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest, and it's always the easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports and events, whether that's NFL, NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, even golf, folks. Head to betonline.ag, that's betonline.ag, to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Just make sure to use promo code BELIEVE, promo code BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet online, where the game starts.
Heck yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm very excited for sweet potato casserole though. Like, what is that? Like that has to taste good for them to put it on the menu, but like, how?
That's a great question. Maybe mapley of some sort. It's going to be a sugary thing in some way,
right?
Yeah,
It'll be very interesting. I mean, they do Biggie s'mores. You wouldn't think s'mores would translate well to a beer,
right? We'll report back.
Yeah, that's going to be something else. That'll be an interesting one. But takeaways from the Royal Rivalry: the Oyster Bowl, as some were calling it, the biggest Oyster Bowl this side of the Mississippi we've seen in 2 decades.
That's big. Yeah, I hadn't heard that yet, but that's really cool. We were there, which was fun. I would say my biggest takeaway, first of all, is that I very much enjoyed the ODU game day experience.
Yes.
I had a good time. I thought it was fun. I think their stadium, where it's like, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but it was, even kind of on all sides. We talked about this a lot during the game. There are stands in both end zones, which I feel like definitely adds a nice element that I like.
And the really cool thing was in the one side where it's like all suites, the bottom was like almost. It felt like, I'm not entirely sure, but it seemed like it was a bar where like anyone
Yeah.
could go and just like have standing room only, and you're like right in the end zone. That was really cool. I did describe it to you at one point as like close your eyes and like think of Bridgeforth and draw it from memory, because it did kind of have that feel. But I too really enjoyed that stadium.
And it's just a nice little reminder, right? Of like, hey, we're in the Sun Belt now, which I think is just so much better. Like for road trips, like I would never have gone and like made a road trip with you and texted you and like, let's go
Let's
to
go to
Delaware.
William&Mary.
Yeah, let's go to Williamsburg. Like, I don't think that's one that's that exciting. This one has some level of stakes, and it's probably as low as the stakes might get, hopefully, like long term for the rivalry, right? With like
Yeah.
ODU loses, so cannot go to a bowl. JMU wins, but is not able to go to a bowl due to transition rules. Can't win the Sun Belt East. So, like, you would think in future years, it could have even more meaning. I would kind of love to see him stick it the last weekend of the year.
Do you prefer? I mean, yeah, because it's an in-state rivalry. I think that'd be the best like rivalry week game. I was thinking maybe Marshall, maybe Coastal. I mean, that's what Coastal's the last game now. Maybe App, but
Yep.
I think ODU is probably the best, like the most natural one. That is if ODU's good, and if we're good.
Yeah. Yeah. Signetti afterward had some interesting comments, but among them was his comment about, this is going to be a good rivalry, down the road. Because they kind of stomped him a little bit and they played well. I think the key to it is a healthy Todd Centeio, which I guess we can go off that a little bit. One of Signetti's other comments, I don't know if you watched the 5-minute post-game interview he did.
I watched bits and pieces, and I think I know what you're going to bring up.
Where he goes, it wasn't healthy against Louisville. And the plan we had was kind of run the ball. We got bigger things on our mind. Get out of there and get him home. It was like, oh, well, all right then. I didn't know you were just giving that game away. But that's cool that in hindsight that was the strategy.
That wasn't the part that stuck out to me. There was one piece where he was like, "Yeah, Todd, he went out there and played a good game. He was only 80%, but
I
he
like
went
that
out."
too.
And I was like, "So what was he last week?"
66%, he said.
He said 66%.
He said he was 66%. Now he's 80%. Which it was also funny because I don't know if you listened to the players one.
No, I didn't. None of those.
Centeio was pretty funny in his like 4 minutes. They asked him a few things, but one of them they're like, if he was healthy, he's like, "Oh, I was fine," and he goes, "And I was fine last week," and he made a big smirk. So I don't know. They had their messages crossed on like what they were going to say about his injury, but
That definitely feels like Todd thought he was good and like understood what coach was doing. If he had a smirk,
yeah,
it has a feeling like he understands what Signetti was doing. I will say I wish Signetti was more transparent with us last week, so we weren't sitting here on the podcast
right.
going, "Well, they're." Now it makes us look stupid. Where Signetti's sitting there and goes, "Well, that was our plan the whole time. We didn't care, so why did you guys care?" And it's like, well, if you had told us not to care, I wouldn't have cared.
Won't somebody think of the podcasters?
I,
You know,
that's what I'm saying.
it's ridiculous.
What are they going to talk about for an hour every week?
I know. It's just you'd think he would do things more for us than he does.
Yeah, but Todd Centeio, back to that. I mean, he won the Oyster Bowl MVP, coveted trophy that everyone wants to win once in their career, and he did it.
Yep.
Offensive player of the week in the Sun Belt as well. I mean, he tossed for over 300 yards. I don't think he had a touchdown pass.
A little surprised he won that award.
Who would you have given it to?
I have no idea. I just
Jalen Walker.
You would give him offensive player of the week.
Oh, I thought you.
Oh, you mean the Oyster Bowl? You're talking about the Oyster Bowl.
Yeah, we're talking about two completely different awards.
I think he was probably fine for that one. I was surprised without a touchdown pass that he won offensive player of the week across the conference because he ran for one, but it wasn't like one touchdown and like 330 yards. He played well. His completion percentage was super high. I was just surprised that there was nobody else that they thought was in the mix. So I guess he's played 8 games where he's been healthy. They've said, and he's won 3 of those 8 or something, which is pretty impressive.
What do you think is odds if we were Vegas? We're setting the lines for offensive player of the year in the Sun Belt. It really comes down, in my opinion, to Grayson McCall and Todd Centeio. Centeio battered against Louisville, didn't, and then what before that was Marshall. He didn't play, and then Call likely to miss these final 2 weeks. Who do you what's the line? Where do you make in Todd Centeio to win? Is he the favorite? Is he not the favorite? Does he have to do some more in these last 2 weeks?
I think if JMU wins out, I think it'll be him, assuming
Okay.
McCall can't come back because you'll have the last 3 games McCall doesn't play in. If JMU wins out, they finish atop the East. So I think it's pretty easy to look at the East, and then you kind of look over at the West, and you look at like Troy, and Troy's like atop the West, and they
Yeah.
score like 8 points a game, so they're not going to have the guy, you know. So you kind of look at the top of the divisions, who's the better player. Centeo. You also add in the fact that without Centeo, they're horrible
Yeah.
offensively. So I think he's got a pretty good chance. We can talk about that in a little bit because he did miss one drive, and the drive didn't end very positively for JMU. So he's been playing great. If they can, I mean, rolled his ankle a little bit in this game over ODU, so hopefully you can get him back. But when he's healthy, they're one of the best group of 5 teams in the country because they can really move the ball, and the defense is pretty good.
It is kind of hilarious the drop off this team had, and like at such an aggressive rate,
Yeah.
because before he gets injured, he's on pace, of course, to win Offensive Player of the Year in the Sun Belt. This, that, and the other, and the offense is one of the top 15 units in all efficiency metrics in the nation. And he misses the Marshall game, and they just plummet. And then what happens in the Louisville game? They're right now sitting at about, I think when I was doing my research, 68th in the nation in offensive efficiency, and like that's just such a far drop. And like when Centeio's healthy, that's not what this offense is.
Yeah, they're so much better when he's healthy. He makes so many good throws. He can extend plays. It just gets everything going, and then I would say they can't stack the box. ODU is still stacking the box.
It, well, yeah, let's talk about that. Well, two things. Going back to that rolled ankle, I don't think they talked about it on the broadcast because a few people were texting me during the game about like, is
Yeah,
Centeio out? I don't think the broadcast realized he rolled his ankle on that play. So if you didn't realize that watching the game, he did roll his ankle, is what it looked like, and appeared to be in some pain, heavy limping, missed the final drive of the first half, and then at one point Barnett was warming up coming out of halftime, helmet on, and it looked like Barnett was going to start the second half. But I guess they taped up Centeio well, or maybe I'm looking too much into Barnett just throwing the ball around coming out of halftime. But that something we should worry about moving forward, or do you think that was just one of the things where you roll your ankle, you tape it up, you get a week off, or you get a week of rest, and you'll be good to go on Saturday?
he said post game that it was sort of a thing where it's like he's probably going to be banged up with his shoulder oblique and now ankle the rest of the year, and he just seems like he's going to gut through it as much as he can, right? Like if he can walk or jog reasonably and throw the football, he's going to play. So it kind of depends on, I guess, what percentage you can have him at. But I mean,
66
Georgia's
apparently.
66% or 80% was a huge difference.
Also, the difference in 66 to 80 is not that. Like he was at like
Yeah,
50, that was like a 50 to 80 jump.
yeah, at least it was massive. But I mean, when he's healthy, like there's some things he can do in the short passing game where he doesn't necessarily need like a ton of shoulder
Yeah.
strength, but he can stretch the field deep when he does have his shoulder healthy, which is helpful because they did hit a couple deep balls in the game. So if he's healthy, they have a good chance of winning the last two. If he's banged up, it's going to be a little bit iffier, but I understand why they're going to go with a banged up Todd Centeio over other options.
Yeah, what is that other option? What made you think that? What
I
made
think
you
that's
think
the
they need to go with Todd Centeio over, maybe a healthy Billy Atkins? What made you think that during the game?
I think it would have been interesting had Centeio not been able to come back from like a future of JMU football perspective, even though I think we both think they're going to bring in transfers at the quarterback position.
Yeah, probably
But
15 of them, honestly.
but it would have been really interesting because Adkins comes in
Yep,
his first snap, I think was the scramble where he had a
it
nice
was.
he had a nice 10-yard run. It was like, oh, sweet. Like
He knows
he
how to
sort of
evade pressure, and he knows
he
how to read a
evaded pressure,
pocket.
ran for a first down, and then he threw a really bad interception, like a really bad interception.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was apparent on the broadcast, but from where we were sitting, Chris Thornton finds the hole in the zone and just is running wide open. Like no one is within a 20-yard radius of this man. And Atkins rolls out, has him in his line of sight, and fires it directly to the linebacker. Maybe the
It
worst interception I've ever seen.
It was bad. It was one where like if he gets it out earlier on the line drive, like it probably works, or he's just got to float it over. Like
Yeah.
yeah, it just wasn't a good throw. Kind of a bad read if that's the throw you're making. So that was tough. Plus, his performance in the Marshall game obviously wasn't great. So I don't think you can mid-season like completely change his confidence and get him rolling. So, but it was interesting because he was sort of understandably, I think, a little disappointed in himself on the sideline. But then it did seem like Barnett was tossing the ball around a little bit. Signetti said in the post game that going like into halftime, he was worried about Centeo, and then like as they came back onto the field, he asked him if he was like ready to go, and he was like, "Let's roll." So then he was like, "Okay, fine, we'll just go with Todd," and it worked out obviously pretty nicely, even though he wasn't 100%. So yeah, they kind of need a healthy Todd to win the last two because I think Georgia State and Coastal are too competent to play with a backup and win.
I think, yeah, I mean, I don't think JMU, I think if JMU is playing with not Todd, they win maybe one Sunbelt game this season. Like, I think the drop off from Todd is extreme, and maybe I'm overreacting to it based off of recency. But I think it's an uphill battle. So if Todd doesn't play, I think they lose both of these games. With that being said, I think if Todd plays, this defense is so good, and we saw what they could do against ODU, and they didn't let them. I mean, their field goal came because of that interception from Billy Atkins right before the first half ended. So like they pitched a shutout really for that game against an ODU offense that isn't great, but it's not that bad.
It's pretty bad,
Yeah, and
but it was still a very good performance. You're right.
they didn't have their key like stud
Yeah,
wide receiver who if he was in, I think they probably put up 14 points. Um, but I mean, we just have to talk about that defense for a second. They're one of the top units in the nation with every single regular metric, advanced metric, one of the best against the run. They don't let you do anything within the box. They're going to shut you down. Their only weakness is their secondary, but their defensive line gets pressure and forces quarterback. I think what we saw in the ODU game, which was really good, they weren't necessarily getting to Hayden Wolf all that often. They got a couple big sacks and big moments, but they get enough to him where he have to move his feet and he'd have to bring his eyes from downfield and bring him in and check the pocket and try and evade pressure and just kind of throw him off of rhythm, which is going to be really big moving forward in these next two games, especially if Grayson McCall plays in that season finale against Coastal. But that's where you can get the JMU defense is that secondary, is the passing attack. But I mean, as long as that front seven is playing so well, I'm not sure that the secondary will get all that exposed.
I'm very excited about the team. I know there are only 2 games left, but even the future looks so bright, and I think the defense is playing so well. And the points like Signetti has made about the lack of depth, I think some of it is true, but I also think it sells short the fact that like they've got some really good players. Like they had Devin Coles come in late and rip away an interception. Jordan
Oh
White
my
came in
god.
and ripped away an interception. Like they were playing really, really well. They have some of their like lower level, I guess you could say, defensive linemen who aren't necessarily the starter on the 2 deep that I thought played well. Like they go deep. Jalen Green on the edge. Going back and watching some of it, like in person, I was like, oh, I feel like he could have made some more plays. And then, like you mentioned, like they're putting like 2 guys on like
Yeah,
a
he was getting
200.
double teamed.
He was getting like chipped by tight ends or whatever as a 240-pound edge, and then he also still had a lot of like big time plays where he either forced a pressure or got close. Had some tackles for loss in this one. I think he had 1 tackle for loss, but he played well. And then like, oh yeah, they just throw in Aiden Fisher, a linebacker I had not heard of, who finishes with like 5 tackles and was a beast.
Yeah, the freshman who like all the talks been on Trey Hendricks and like his role in stepping into that linebacker room, and then this kid just steps in and it's just like, no, it's my time to shine. If we want to run 3 linebacker sets, we can run 3 linebacker sets, which wouldn't be a bad idea, I think. But at the same time,
Yeah,
like a fantastic just overall performance from top to bottom, left to right, every single way you can cut it. It was a great defensive performance. It was a really good offensive performance. We saw Chris Thornton have a really good game, which is something we haven't seen for quite some time. With Reggie Brown, not sure how long Reggie Brown's going to be out, but seeing Chris Thornton come in and be really, really solid and they get him the ball in good ways. Will be interesting to see kind of how Devin Ravenel factors in moving forward and Terrence Green without Reggie Brown. I feel like they were just really reliant on Thornton and passes out of the backfield. So will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, for sure. And just going back to linebacker for a second, it's
Please
like, oh,
do.
they have
Please do.
Torres Jones and Jalen Walker, and then you mentioned Trent Hendrick, and they have now Aiden Fisher. And it's like, oh, well, that'll be cool to watch them sort of, step in for the veteran guys who are leaving. It's like, oh, Torres Jones, redshirt sophomore, Jalen Walker, sophomore. Like to have those guys and then like freshmen underneath them is very impressive. And then you obviously knock on wood and cross your fingers and do some sort of dance and hope that nobody tries to grab them in the portal because they're so. I mean, they've got some really impressive guys, and I'm excited to see them develop over the years because their defense, assuming they can do a good job like keeping the guys who are supposed to returning, are going to be. It's going to be a phenomenally good defense next year, especially if they add some freshmen who can make an impact, add some transfers who can make an impact. Like they're going to be really good, and then it sets you up for an offseason where like you do anything at quarterback and you get competent quarterback play next year, and they're going to be one of the best teams in the Sun Belt, at least on paper. They just have so much returning, so much good talent that they have barely even shown this year that I'm just really impressed with them overall. And then a quick shout out to Camden Wise, who I think has gotten some heat from the fan base, including us. He was
I'll
awesome.
be. I was on the front line of the Camden Wise hate. I will say that.
He was phenomenal in this game.
He was
4 for
three
4.
for 3.
No, those are the PATs. 3 for 3, 4 for 4 in the PATs. That's impressive. And then there were a couple spots where I was like, oh man, like this could turn the tide if they miss the field goal. And he connects from what? There was like a 20-yarder, which was pretty short chip shot, but then 33 and 44, career long 44.
Yes, it was really
That was good.
impressive.
That
Yeah,
was
it was good.
I
Yeah,
was pleased. I was happy.
sure.
Yeah, it's
I would
good.
love. I want to see it string together. I'm not going to go all aboard that as the leader of that hate train, which probably isn't something I want to tout actively.
I'm all aboard now.
I'm still patiently waiting at a stop down the line to get on this hype train.
Fair enough. I was also impressed, if we're talking about young guys, Wayne Knight at running back.
Can we talk about Latrell Palmer? Not like
I thought that was interesting.
Getting moved. Was it a match? Do you think it's a matchup thing, or do you think it's Wayne Knight jumping over him in the depth chart?
No, he's still got some good reps compared. I guess
In
Knight
garbage time, though.
Knight didn't even technically have a carry. He just had the 32-yard catch and a kickoff return. So I would say he's still there. But Latrell 4 carries for 24 yards. He's pretty good when they used him. But it's interesting because I think Percy and Kalon, the explosiveness is hard to match. But Palmer did have a couple good runs, and his power is solid. So I like it when they can mix it up. So like for future years, if you can have Kalon and Wayne Knight as sort of the faster guys, and you can mix in Latrell next year, like that sounds like a pretty darn good running back room. So there's a lot to be excited about there. Interested to see how they use Latrell the last 2 weeks, especially being at home because this was like 75 and sunny. It was like literally, I mean, it was just a perfect day in Norfolk. So really good stuff there. But as it gets a little colder here and it's more like winter football and in late fall in Harrisonburg, I wonder if Latrell and sort of his physical style fits what they want.
Yeah. Sorry, my mic dropped out for a second, and I didn't hear a word you said until the very end. But I trust what you said was beautifully said.
Thank you.
Really just high praise.
Thank you.
I'm cutting in and out over here. I'm struggling.
You're grinding.
It's the struggle bus. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Man,
can you hear me?
This is awkward. I can't hear you.
That's incredible.
There you
That's
are.
great to
You're
hear.
back.
You got
You're
me?
back.
I was just
Can you
talking
hear
about
me?
how Latrell, yeah. I was talking about how Latrell in cold weather could be a little more of a factor.
I think that'd be a lot of fun. I realized for our podcast listeners, you can't see my face off that. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Moving from that game, keep the wheels churning. Georgia State's up next, who, after having an abysmal start to the season, and I don't know if it was necessarily abysmal, CBS Sports put them in their not top 25, which was their 25 worst college football teams. They were in there for the first couple weeks of the season. A tough loss to Charlotte early on. First couple of weeks, they were a blocked punt here or there away from winning games. And then all of a sudden the tide turned and they were 0-4. Then they rattled off, I think, 3 straight wins, something like that. But they're 4-2 over their last 6, and they're sitting at 4-6 on the season.
Yeah.
Win their last 2, all of a sudden this team is bowl eligible and could go bowling for the 4th straight season. What are your expectations for this game? What do the Dukes have to do to stay competitive? I mean, imagine with Todd Centeio, they will be competitive.
Yeah, Georgia State can run it a little bit. I think the thing with them that's probably worth noting the most is just like they have 2 losses that aren't great. And their other losses, Charlotte, which came by a point, but like can't happen. And Louisiana Monroe at home, ULM this past weekend. Yeah. So those are tough. But the other ones like South Carolina, North Carolina, Coastal Carolina, I mean, my God, they hate the Carolinas. And then you look at App State, also a team from North Carolina, and you're starting to wonder, Charlotte from North Carolina. They're pretty good when they're not playing teams.
What? They're undefeated against teams not in Carolina, huh?
Until this weekend when UL Monroe got them. But hey, it's just a weird little coincidence. But you're 4-2 right in the last 6. They've definitely played better. But you can still get them a little bit. I think their defensive efficiency rankings are actually respectable. I think ESPN has them at like 60th in the country. Their offense kind of struggles, which I think is maybe due to a lack of a consistent passing attack at times, but it's gotten better the last few weeks. Not a pushover by any means. Like JMU has to go out, focus, execute well. It can't look ahead to Coastal, and you got to play well to win. But I also think they probably have a more complete football team than Georgia State does.
Yeah, Georgia State is like good. They're like okay, which is an interesting drop off from last season. Like they were one of the better teams in the Sun Belt last year, and then this year they're just like there.
I think that's pretty accurate.
Like and if you don't do it, like if you have another game like you did against Georgia Southern though I think is a better team and like which
I lost you. I still lost you. It's a real struggle for the audio today, folks. I assume what you were saying was that Georgia. I got you now. No, I have you.
Oh, man.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You can hear me?
Yes.
I can't hear you.
And what is going on with you?
Very awkward.
Yeah, it's a good thing we live stream.
We'll have to cut this out in the actual podcast.
No, keep it. This is what the people come for.
Give me 1 second.
While you do that, I'm gonna give a quick men's basketball update here. They're leading Howard 87-62, and we'll get into it. But this basketball team is special. They got North Carolina, number 1 in the country on Sunday. And folks, do not sleep on the Dukes. Let's see if we can pull up some stats here for a little in-game update.
Oh, I can hear you.
You're back? Oh, I was about,
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, what was I saying? Oh, if this is a game like Georgia Southern, like Marshall, where they're turning it over a lot, Georgia State is a team that is going to make you pay. Like, they're going to win this game if you shoot yourself in the foot. So just don't shoot yourself in the foot, and you're good to go. What stats are you going to ping up? I think all the people wanted to know since you're trying to kill time.
Yeah, I didn't know how long you were going to be out, so I was doing a quick in-game men's basketball update. I was going on full hype train, so we'll hit pause, and I'll get back to that in a minute.
Oh, don't worry. Look at one of those things.
Oh, we have to hit. Man. Is it historic just from like point spreads, or have they never been 3-0 before?
No, they've been to 3-0 a couple times during the Rowe era.
Yeah, because he scheduled like 4 D2s.
No, I think the historic start is this is the first time they've ever scored over 90 points in their first 3 games.
Well, make it 4 games.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, the boys. Well, they need 3 more points in 4 minutes, but I think it's doable.
They were 3 points away from scoring over 100 in their first 3 games. Okay, but great breakdown and just a quick time. Hopefully I don't cut out during this because this is what we actually get paid for. The 3-notched preview, Georgia State's coming to town. Before I ask Bennett a question, I just want to kind of share some interesting stats and nuggets about Georgia State They have the number one rushing offense in the Sun Belt, and it's led by Darren Granger, their quarterback. He's a transfer from Furman, 7th in the Sun Belt in rush yards. He's thrown for 16 touchdowns, thrown 7 interceptions, passed for over 1,900 yards, and he's rushed for over 605 touchdowns on the ground. He's the wheel that just spins and gets this rushing attack going, and he's really important to it. And we've talked at length about JMU's struggles against mobile quarterbacks. So that's going to be a really interesting game within the game. But we were talking about how they're just kind of a team that's there. They're 52nd in the nation in expected points added, 69th in offense, 34th in defense. But what's interesting is they're actually more efficient when they pass the ball than when they run the ball. They average 7.7 yards per pass and just 4.8 yards per rush. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to take advantage of JMU's secondary, because if they try to run the ball, JMU's defense is one of the most efficient in the nation, stopping the run. I believe 4th in the nation in rush defense. So really interesting. But what do you think JMU needs to do in order to win this game and stop Georgia State's chances of becoming bowl eligible?
Yeah, I think the bowl eligibility is an interesting piece. I imagine Georgia State, they got to win their last 2. Yep. Pretty motivated from that perspective, right? They have something to play for too, as does JMU trying to finish atop the East. If JMU can stop the run, I think that really puts Georgia State at a massive disadvantage from what they like to do offensively. Then you add in a healthy Todd Centeio. I'd love to see them get some other receivers other than just Chris Thornton involved. I think if JMU does that offensively, stops the run defensively, takes advantage of a solid home crowd, I think the Dukes can come out of this one with a win for sure.
Awesome. We look forward to it. We'll be there for this game Saturday, every game day, pouring $5 Duke of Clouds. Friday, when we're there in the tap room, they'll be dropping sweet potato casserole, a very interesting beer. So excited for that. Excited to experience Harrisonburg on a game day. My first time since 2019.
Been a while.
Yeah. I also want to hit you with the stat. JMU is the second best team in the Sun Belt according to SP Plus and EPA. Who's first?
Is it still App State? No. It's Coastal.
It shocked me. No.
It's not. Oh, it's probably Troy.
No.
South Alabama.
South Alabama is the best team according to all advanced metrics in the Sun Belt. My boys.
They do have a very good team. So I could see that, right? Their losses, 4 points to Troy and 1 point to UCLA. So that's a special group.
Give me my respect.
Here's a question.
Yep.
Is the West better than the East?
Yes.
I don't agree.
I was thinking that the other day. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, they have the best team in South Alabama.
You think they're the best team even though Troy beat them?
They have Troy. Troy's one of the top teams. Southern Miss. Although their bottom brings them down pretty drastically.
I think the top of the West is probably better this year, right?
I'd say that, yeah, the top is much like the top of the East isn't that good.
You're not buying ranked Coastal Carolina?
No, not without Grayson McCall, right? Like,
yeah.
And even so, like, they've won all of these games, but they've all been like close and like within 2 possessions. I don't know. I'm not fully in on Coastal.
I hear you there. I thought the matchup with UVA would be really interesting. Obviously, don't know if it'll happen with everything that went on in Charlottesville this week, so we'll see there. But I think UVA was favored in the game, which I thought was interesting because I know they've had some on-field challenges this year. So I think that would have been interesting, but they might not end up having a bye. But I still feel like, yeah, Coastal's definitely been beatable this year, and they've done I think if you're Jamie Chadwell, like pat on the back, 9-1 feels like through 10 games, like the best they could possibly do with how they've played.
100%. Like the fact they've only had one loss in so many I think the top of the West is stronger than the top of the East. The bottom of the East is stronger than the bottom of the West. They'll just contrarian and say I think they'll be better, but I get your point. The bottom of the East, go to you. Coastal. Has their there somewhere. Bottom of the East.
It sounds like you might have been abducted by aliens. It's just a little, but it's still pretty good. You're hanging in there. They did, I don't know if you can hear me, they did surpass 90 points. So the history is still alive for the men's basketball team, folks.
How do I sound now?
You sound good now, yeah.
Okay. I think it's my Wi-Fi.
That would make sense because I think it's a new thing.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi in Eva's apartment isn't great.
Do your best, you know?
Hopefully she's not listening to the podcast and
Yeah.
gets mad at me for making fun of her Wi-Fi.
Well.
I think you were talking about it.
I was talking back about the men's basketball boys now. Do we do Sunbelt Pick'em?
We can.
Is it work?
We'll have to say we have to take a quick break, and we will be right back with Sunbelt Pick'em. Well, that's because I had myself muted, and I was
There
just
you
talking.
are.
I was just talking to myself for
I
an
didn't even know you
extended
were
period
on.
of times.
I was
That's
in a different tab working away.
so awkward. It's a rough night with technical issues, but we're back for the Sunbelt Pick'em. This week's Sunbelt Pick'em. Forgot what we did last week. I haven't really even been keeping track.
I don't
So
know.
we have it.
We'll have to look it up.
But it's time. This week's Sunbelt Pick'em. Scrolling down to the Sunbelt here in the trusty ESPN app. Starting things off, Louisiana is taking on Florida State.
Love Florida State in this game. The Seminoles are
course
actually,
you
I
do.
was low on them early in the year. They're actually pretty good.
I think a lot of people were low on Florida State to start the year. In fairness, I don't think they had a great start. They're 7-3
They
now.
know
I believe
they got off to a good start.
they did.
Well, kind of. They won. I think they were like 3-0 with the LSU win, and people were like, Mike Norvell, they're back. But then they lost like 3 in a row.
Yeah. Okay. There's a point
No,
where I
it was-
remember everyone was like
yeah.
selling the stock on. them.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Florida State. ODU App State. App State is also interesting. Florida State's just a 24-point home favorite. I don't know. I feel like it should be more. Old Dominion App
Yeah.
State. App State's a 15.5-point home favorite.
So I guess, and Shane Maitland had written this in something, and I didn't realize it. App State has 2 FCS wins, and you can only count 1.
Do they
toward
really?
Toward bowl. They beat Robert Morris in the Citadel. So you have to have only 1 can count toward bowl eligibility, I believe. So I think they have to win their last 2 to make a bowl. And I think Marshall is actually in a similar spot because they beat like Gardner Webb and then somebody else, which is fascinating. So I'll say App State, but it's interesting. They could go 6-6, and it sounds like maybe not even be in a bowl.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What a weird season for App. I think App State, though, does win this one after watching ODU in person. If they're without Jennings for another week, that offense is incapable of moving the football. Their defense is good, but not great, and was really wanting to stack the box against JMU, which wasn't the right choice. South Alabama, Southern Miss. Who do you got?
I love South Alabama here. They're
Correct
just too
choice.
good. They're too good.
They're the best team in the Sun Belt according to every single advanced metric, and they're a 7.5-point road favorite on NFL Network. I'm right there with you. South Alabama is winning that one against Southern Miss. Southern Miss, after a hot start, they're just 5-5 now, looking to get bowl eligible with trying to get a win in one of their last 2 games to become bowl eligible. I don't think it's coming against South Alabama. UL Monroe, Troy. Troy is a 15-point favorite against a UL Monroe team that just picked up a big win over Georgia State on Saturday.
Yeah. I like Troy here. I think Troy's defense is too good. I think they'll grind out a victory in this one.
Most likely, yes, I agree. I think UL Monroe has 4 wins, and it feels like every time it's like a random game that they shouldn't win.
Yeah.
And then they just like don't know how to string them together. So I'm right there with you. Troy as well. Arkansas State, Texas State, a battle of 3-7 teams.
Snoozer.
Texas State is a 5.5-point favorite.
I'll take Arkansas State. I don't know. They both stink.
I'll take Texas State, but I'll take Arkansas State to cover.
Okay. Close game. Worth watching
Yeah.
then.
I mean, I don't know if a 10-7 game is necessarily worth watching, but sure. Marshall, Georgia Southern. Marshall, a 4.5-point road favorite against Georgia Southern.
Georgia Southern, what are you doing? You got to clinch bowl eligibility, my guys. They're struggling a little bit. They've been disappointing me. I think they bounce back and beat Marshall. They get their 6th win.
I agree. I think Georgia Southern has what it takes to kind of pick apart this Marshall defense. Clay Helton is a damn good football coach. I think he'll have the scheme together to beat Marshall's elite level defense. Will be a really fun game, though. So give me Georgia Southern plus 4.5. Georgia Southern money line. I like that one. All right.
You want to pick the boys?
Oh, duh. Man, I've been slacking with Sunbelt Pick'em.
I know.
JMU, Georgia State. Who do you got?
I love JMU. I think JMU will win this game 28-20.
Really? You think we allow that many points?
20-20.
All right. I think JMU wins 37-10.
I love that. And I think we're assuming UVA doesn't play. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Smart.
This might be the most important segment of the whole show.
Is the men's basketball team good?
Are we going to upset UNC?
I think probably by 15.
So in all seriousness, they just won again live, just wrapped. They scored 95 against Howard. It was the closest game of the season. Final score was 95-69, I believe.
Yes.
I mean, just, I mean, this offense is elite. Did Votto start tonight, or did he come off the bench again as like an elite level 6-man? Like, what's going on?
I don't know. It's pretty hard to find these stats, but he played well. He had 17 and was 5 of 7 from 3.
And Friedel led everyone with 23 points.
And he was 5 of 9 from 3.
Like, this team knows how to shoot. We've been talking about how this is a small ball team that can't shoot. And now all of a sudden they're a small ball team that can shoot, that runs at one of the fastest tempos in the country and looks good. And the one weakness of UNC has been playing tempo offenses.
Which is interesting because they typically like to fly. But they've gotten a little slower under Hubert Davis. They aren't quite as good as that as they have been in the past. And they haven't looked good, UNC.
You tell me, man. You
right,
break it down. What's the recipe for JMU to pull off the historic upset this Sunday in Chapel Hill at the Dean Smith Arena? Center?
I think it might be the center, but just show up. That's how bad UNC is. Just show up, and I think they're going to have a chance. They played UNC Wilmington. They ended up winning by 13, but it was kind of a lackluster showing opening night of the season. It was competitive. They really just had sort of a little burst there at the end of the first half that helped them pull ahead. And then they played the College of Charleston, which loves to run. And they were trailing by 7 points at halftime. They ended up winning by 16. But they were trailing by 7 at halftime. Now they're playing Gardner-Webb tonight. Do you think Gardner-Webb's any good? No. 26-22 UNC at halftime. That's
what?
2.5 consecutive performances where they don't look like the number one team in the country. I think maybe we got a little bit too high on them. Weren't they like an 8 seed that made a run?
Yeah.
Are they actually like a top team, or are they more like the 20th best team in the country? Because JMU might be a top 50 team.
You think they're that high? You think JMU's that good?
I think they're definitely top 75.
Okay.
I think they're really good. Right now they're at 92 in KenPom. That's before this performance. Like, national people who like really pay attention to like the inner workings of college basketball, not talking about like, no offense, I'm not talking about like a Jay Billis who's like high level ESPN analyst, like the people that are like in the weeds, but also have like
mid-major madness. Like people like watch like America East basketball who understand that the fourth best team there could take. Yeah.
People like today are like, oh man, I can't wait to watch JMU play. And it was like, oh sweet. And then they won and people are like, oh my God. Like, cause they just keep the spread will be like, oh, they're, supposed to win the game by 8 and they're scoring 100 points. So like if you're betting overs or a JMU spread, you're like the happiest bettor in the world, because I don't think their preseason like metrics line up at all with how good they're actually going to be.
Yeah. Can you explain why you don't think their metrics don't add up? Is it the injuries from last season or what?
I think it's the injuries. I also think it's really hard if you're like a KenPom or a bookmaker who's looking at KenPom, or if you have your own model or whatever, to adjust for transfers and how that impacts the team. So I think there's stuff like that where I think like Friedel's impact is maybe going under the radar. Even Offram has been super efficient. So like those are stuff that maybe you can't anticipate. The other one is it's pretty much impossible when you have guys returning to be like, to just assume someone's making this giant leap. Like you look at returning production, but I don't think you can factor in this giant leap where it's like, oh, Terrence Edwards went from a role player to like maybe one of the best players in the Sun Belt. Like that's one you can't necessarily expect to happen. It's not a transfer addition. It's just like, oh, the guys on the team got better. Like Julian Wooden's been way more efficient too. So when you talked about coming in the year, right, that if he's more efficient, like it can kind of change what they're doing a little bit.
Wasn't he my pick to be most improved?
Yep.
So far, so good. I mean, I got to pat myself on the back on that one. But UNC, what they do really well, and I don't mean to be like grilling you with this and like having you be like our resident basketball expert, but I'm going to be kind of asking dumb questions for you to answer for the audience, for myself, because you've tuned in every single game so far this season. I have not. I'm excited. UNC is going to be the first time I really watch this basketball team play a game. But, I mean, UNC, they have one of the best big men in the country, right? Isn't Armando
Yep.
Bacot really good? Like, and what's JMU's weakness? Like, do you think there's a way that they can almost counter the strength of UNC by just pouncing on them with an efficient 3-point barrage and up tempo and almost render Armando Bacot useless?
I think they can probably not render him useless, but I think they can certainly limit him in certain ways. He's going to be really good, but at a certain point, it's like if he's scoring a bunch of twos, it's okay if he goes like if he gets 25 and 15. I don't think that guarantees a loss because I think they can do enough to some of the other players that give them a chance to hang in there. They've also been without a player, and I got to jog my memory of the name. They've been without Puff Johnson, who's a good player for them. I don't know if he's playing tonight. I know he was like suited up at least, so I wonder if he'll be able to play against JMU. That's certainly one. But they don't go that deep right now. Like they don't seem
They didn't
quite
go
that
that deep last year either.
yeah, so it's like they're maybe not the deepest team in the world where you can wear them out just a little bit, but I think they have some guys like Caleb Love's extremely streaky. So coming into tonight, he was 2 of 13 from three. Like there are times where he'll shoot his team out of the game for North Carolina. So yeah, they have Baycott, who's a beast, but at the same time, you've seen a little bit this year that I didn't know was necessarily possible of Offram hitting threes. I think he knocked one down against Buffalo, a willingness of him to take them, Sule to take them. Amadi's probably not taking them, but the other guys, like if you're Baycott, he's definitely not as comfortable defending away from
The
the
basket,
rim.
yeah.
So that's one where they can space it out with those guys and score. They can go in transition and maybe get some quick baskets. The issue I think is North Carolina, like historically, is exceptionally good offensive rebounding and then scoring from right 2-point range down in the post. They're pretty darn good, and that's going to be really tough for JMU, which has been a lot better this year. But Hampton, Buffalo, Howard, not exactly the same post presence as North Carolina.
That was my next question. What type of impact will it be going from playing these terrible teams, including a Division III team? Then you're going on the road into one of the most storied buildings in the entire country in a crazy atmosphere against maybe not stylistically, maybe not even advanced analytically, the number one team in the country, but they have a one next to their name. How much does that impact the psyche of JMU?
I think it'll be tough. I think on the positive side, depending on how this Gardner-Webb game finishes, you have a UNC team that like is probably wondering why they've not looked good for 3 games. Like they spent all offseason hearing about how they were a national title favorite, how they were really good, and almost won it last year. And they had a nice little lead on Kansas in that championship game that they sort of threw away, and now maybe aren't as good this year. We'll see. But like I just think there's a disconnect between the AP poll and what teams will actually be. So like Ken Pom has Carolina before tonight at 12, and it had them 9th going into the season. So I think there's like, if they didn't have the one next to their name, I feel like JMU fans would maybe be more confident, right? If it was like number 17 North Carolina.
Would they feel like last year's UVA game?
Maybe not, because even we on that, like before that game, were like, we can win this thing, because I think UVA was so bad, and it was obviously in Harrisonburg, which
Yeah.
you can speak to. That atmosphere, I think, played a pretty huge role right in the win.
I mean, even Tony Bennett said afterwards, where he was like, "This atmosphere was kind of like Cameron Indoor," which I've never experienced Cameron Indoor, but that atmosphere was probably one of the most raucous atmospheres I've ever been in for a sporting event. So yeah, with the UVA game, it was a completely different set of circumstances, 100%. I just wanted to throw that out there to you. I do think this is going to be a fantastic game. I think I think this will be closer than a lot of people expect. I think JMU will. I don't think JMU wins, but I think JMU will put a scare into UNC, much like Charleston did, and from the sounds of it, like what Gardner-Webb's doing. But it might be a little bit more of a sustained threat. And I'm going to say something that I hate when basketball analysts say and I make fun of. But like if JMU hits their shots and like plays their game, there's a route where they win.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they are shooting their season average, they might win this game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
But
think
they
it's
got that season average from playing Valley Forge.
yeah, they've certainly played some teams that are not great. Like they haven't Buffalo is no longer in the top 200. They were in the top 200 of Ken Palm, but they've fallen out. So they've played one non D1 and then 3 games against non top 200 teams. I think the thing that's so interesting though, and probably way more important long term, is they look like a very capable basketball team, which in the Sun Belt,
Yeah.
like they're gonna have a legit chance to make the NCAA tournament. Like Sunday's game is like fun because they're playing number 1 North Carolina, but in the end, it's not a huge deal because the schedule is so weak. They would have to be so impressive to get in that large berth that I don't think we're near like that conversation. But it's one where it's like I feel like we've gone into seasons before, especially during I guess the Row era, if you want to call it that, where there was excitement and there was talent, and then there were some non-conference results that were just like really demoralizing. So to have these sort of building up on top of each other ahead of conference play, it feels like the fan base is starting to be like, wait a second, like we might have some competent basketball being played.
In years past, and I won't even just pile onto the Row era, even the early Byington era, I feel like in years past, granted we're kind of still in the early Byington era, in years past against Buffalo, that's a game you go on the road, and I wouldn't have been surprised if we lost.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's one of those games that past JMU teams don't consistently win, and also don't win by that margin. Howard's a game that they went in, and I wouldn't have been surprised if it was like a close game for some reason, but they
Yeah.
went in and hung 95 on them. Yeah, they allowed 70, but like how much of that was garbage time? I really don't know. It's just like this is a team that is doing what they have to do. They're playing the schedule in front of them, and they're demolishing the teams in front of them, and that's all you can ask. Past teams wouldn't have done that, and that's why this is a historic start. Like past teams, since the inception of JMU men's basketball, teams haven't done this, and now they've done it for 3 straight games, hung 90 plus, and they are 7 points away combined from having 100 in each of their games. I think they're averaging over 100 a game this season.
Right. Like that's crazy. I think that's perfectly stated because like I'm looking at the schedule now from last year. And remember they had that game so early November, they go on the road to Eastern Kentucky, which finished the year 260 in Ken Palm, and they needed a late steal on an inbounds pass that led to like a Chuck Fulton tip back to win by a point. And like we were going crazy, all the fans were excited with the little clip on Twitter, and they were celebrating in the locker room to go from like needing like a miracle play to beat a non 200 team to going to Buffalo, turning the ball over like 20 times, missing a bunch of shots, and like
That's the other
30
part.
piecing them.
That's the other part. Like they didn't play a great game against Buffalo, and they still demolished them.
Yeah, it's like guess how many turnovers they had against Buffalo?
27.
26. That's crazy.
And they won by 30.
35, like 26 turnover. Well, I don't know how you can turn the ball over 26 times and score 97.
That tempo. Can you check Ken Pump for me? Are they the number 1 tempo team?
Tempo is up there. Their offensive possessions are 11th. So they're up there offensively, and they also forced 30 Buffalo turnovers.
So really, you're actually plus 4.
4 on that, which is hilarious. But like they made some mistakes and still absolutely destroyed a team. So I mean, there's a lot to like about this team because yeah, like you said, in the past they've had these games where it's like, oh, they should take advantage of this, and they don't.
Yeah.
And now they're showing that maybe they're able to kind of do that, which is super exciting for them. Because last year, yeah, they had some games where it was like, oh, it'd be cool if they did that. They also lost motivation and then faded away toward the end. So who knows what they.
It was sad.
But they're good. I think they're good.
Yeah. I think they're a really good team, and I think if they play a near perfect game against a UNC team that has come out for 2.5 games, they have a shot at winning. Now, if UNC plays a little bit better and JMU has 15 turnovers, I don't think they're winning. Like JMU has to play a near perfect game of basketball. To pull the upset. But I think it's in the realm of possibility. And if you had told me 2 years ago JMU is going to go on the road against the number 1 team in the country and a win is in the realm of possibility. Now I'm not saying it's likely, but like you can see a scenario where it happens, I would have called you insane. Like imagine in the Rowe era, you're like, all right, they're going to open the season 3-0 against a D3 team and no one in the top 200. Then they're going to go on the road against number 1. And there's going to be a chance they win. I would have been like, no.
Right.
Here we are, man. It's exciting.
It's really exciting. I can't wait for that game, which we will also be at.
Yeah, so if you're at the game, DM us, tweet us. I know a couple people are there. We'll probably be pulling in like 30 minutes before tip, like the way we've scheduled it. We'll be driving from Harrisonburg that morning.
Yeah, it'll be tough.
Down to Chapel Hill, and then from there, we don't know where life will take us. But looking forward to that. It's going to be an insane journey. But we'll be in Harrisonburg on Friday, getting drinks at 3 Notch, hanging out at some breweries around Harrisonburg. Be watching the game on Saturday. Be a fun time. Another fun time. Oh, wait. What were you going to say? Sorry.
Should be truly a fantastic experience.
Just real quick, I want to touch on women's basketball.
Yeah.
There's not much to talk about considering it was a win against Millersville, a D2 school, and then a win at home against Queens, who's in the middle of a transition from being a D2 team. Now, Queens men's basketball, different story. They were one of the best D2 programs in the nation. Women's, they were mid to low tier in the SAC, in the South Atlantic Conference. So essentially 2 wins against Division II teams back to back, which is good. But anything you saw in those games, any takeaways that had you excited?
Not too much. I mean, they've gotten, some players who stepped up in those, but it's kind of hard to take a lot from that. So we'll see moving forward. I will say the non-conference schedule is way more manageable than I thought. So they've got a game against North Carolina that on the 20th also. So the men's team plays at noon at UNC, and the women's team hosts UNC Sunday at 2 p.m. So if you're watching like on streaming, pretty great day to be a JMU basketball fan with both teams playing North Carolina. Women's team, I think, will have their work cut out for them. Not that the men's team won't.
I think the men's do too.
The women, I think I have less hope because that's a tough one. I think North Carolina like blew out TCU or something. They have a really good team. So that'll be tough. But then like Liberty has not looked great to start the season. Then you have VCU, Maryland, Eastern Shore, William and Mary, Hampton, Eastern Michigan. They've got some winnable games left. So I'd like to see them go into conference play with some quality momentum, even if they aren't that competitive against UNC. So I need to see some more from them. I'd like to see some more from them because I think there's a ton of potential there. And then going into conference play when they add the Texas transfer, Kobe King Hawea, is going to be pretty darn cool. So there's some, I still have some hope. I think for them bouncing back and taking care of business the way they needed to is good.
I think there's still hope. Sunbelt's not a good conference. Non-con, for all intents and purposes, doesn't matter. And so if they can kind of figure things out and go into Sunbelt, I think there's a good chance they make the NCAA women's tournament.
Yeah.
But that's a long way away. But
For sure. No, volleyball, 21-4.
They're really good, man. They're really good. They clinched a spot. They won. Correct me if I'm wrong. They won the Sunbelt tournament.
Sunbelt regular season.
Sunbelt regular season. They're 1 seed going into the Sunbelt tournament. They have an RPI in the top 30, which means they're sniffing around the at-large, right, if they don't win Sunbelt. So really impressive stuff coming out of volleyball. And I believe they went 5-1 against the top 3 teams in RPI in the Sunbelt this season. So, I mean, they kind of were the cream of the crop this year in volleyball.
Didn't lose a game against a match against the Sunbelt East, which is cool.
Damn.
Yeah.
But this leads me to this question. Apologies for the delay. I'm going to read it out loud. I thought Bennett was going to read it out loud, but no, he was just not.
I was going to, and I was processing in my head.
What sport does the Sunbelt move benefit the most? This was a question, or I guess not a question. It was kind of a statement put up by Shane Metlin on Twitter the other day. He raised some really good points because I had a little bit of a sassy answer back to him via quote tweet, but his response made a lot of sense. But I wanted to kind of bring it up into the podcast because I thought it was a really interesting jumping off point for conversation. I think the Sunbelt move has benefited football the most, but what Shane was saying is that the RPIs around the entire Sun Belt are so much higher on average that when they go and they win, they go 5-1 against the top teams in the Sun Belt, and they're winning some of these other games against the Sun Belt East, it raises their RPI. They were never this high in the RPI. I believe the last 3 times they won the CAA, they were in the 80s in RPI. And now they're all the way up in it helps the program a lot. So I get what he's saying 100%. I still think though football is the number one sport. It helps because football isn't getting a top 25 ranking in the FCS.
I think it's football, right? They just beat Old Dominion at Old Dominion. Like that's a huge deal. And I think some of it is like it's hard to take it out of being like football. Like football is just huge in general. So anytime football does anything, it feels big.
And football is top 25.
That was making the top 25 was massive. Being able to play those rivals means more to the overall fan base for sure. I think the point I think the reason the Sun Belt move is so important is like it really benefits you. This is kind of obvious, but like if you can win, like if
Really?
you have a special team and you go out and like ball out whatever your sport is, it's going to be rewarded more in the Sun Belt.
Like, and softball too. You could argue like if softball's really good, it'll benefit softball the most because they're hosting a super regional instead of just a regional, or getting snubbed for hosting a regional after winning the CAA. Like, because you're playing top mid majors. The Raging Cajuns. Which team is the real?
It's the Louisiana. The Raging Cajuns are.
This is going to confuse me a lot as we move deeper into Sunbelt play and like in the next years. The difference between Louisiana Monroe and the Raging Cajuns going to throw me for a loop so many times. But like in softball, it means in baseball too. Granted, baseball was kind of a really strong,
That's another
sport.
One though, where it's like you got to win. Otherwise, it's like it's gonna reveal things a lot about JMU's athletic programs. Like I think this one reveals a lot. Like, oh, Lawrence Steinbrecker, like
one of the best coaches in JMU.
Yeah, like that's pretty darn impressive. Like that they've been able to maintain this in a slightly harder league, and maybe even go above maintaining it. So huge for them. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's hard to. I don't think it's hard to argue that football benefits the most. Just be like, if football has that level of success or like loses 3 games, it can still be like a crazy successful season. So I think clearly there's just absurd benefits for football, but I do think there's at least an incremental bump for volleyball.
Yeah, and I think we'll see a bump in softball and baseball and things like that. But I thought it was a really interesting question. But I think football. Mainly because I just can't get my head, like, volleyball is never ranked. I'm not saying that as a slight to them. Like, football literally moved to the Sun Belt and got ranked.
Without actually doing that much in hindsight.
With
None of the teams they beat were good.
With winning 4 games in the FBS.
And, like, the best one is going to be an App State team that, like, might not play in a bowl. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's not something that's happening in the FCS.
No. And it's like you can't have those like little season things as much in the FCS, like the polls there, like whatever. But you can't like the AP top 25.
Excuse me.
You like the polls?
Some of those FCS polls are very well thought out.
Okay. But they like the AP top 25 poll has that historic meaning. So like
I think the
getting
FCS
in the
Fan Nation poll is pretty historic too.
The funny part is that one's like significantly better than the coaches poll.
I was gonna say one is significantly better. I also would argue the FCS Fan Nation Bowl is more thought out than the AP top 25 because the FCS Fan Nation Bowl never had JMU after losing to Georgia Southern with like 2 votes,
right?
Because a voter just forgot.
They were also like really thorough with the rationale, whereas there's nothing that requires like an AP poll voter to share any reasoning. They just submit it and they're like, I think this happened in basketball, or I think it was basketball. Somebody accidentally put Arizona State instead of Arizona. And they like had it slip through. Like that's hilariously bad. Like, oops, you just added the state.
Receiving votes, Arizona State 0-16. How'd that happen?
Yeah, what is going on here?
Do the Sun Devils have an inside man? Anything else you want to add before we get up on out of here?
No, we have the greatest weekend of our lives coming up, so it's pretty exciting.
Get ready for it. JMU takes on the Georgia State Panthers Saturday 2 p.m. kickoff.
Mm-hmm.
Bennett and I will then be hitting the road Sunday morning to get down to Chapel Hill for a noon tip between the Dukes and the Tar Heels from the Dean Smith Center/Arena. I forget which one it is. We should probably figure that out. I have your ticket on my phone, but
Dean Smith Center.
Dean Smith Center. We'll be there at noon, probably rolling in at like 11 or 11:30, depending on what time we get on the road. But it's going to be a great weekend. 3-notched on Friday. Brewery hopping Friday. We'll see what the night does with us. But until then, that sounded so weird. For Bennett Conlon, my name's Jack Fitzpatrick. Thank you guys for tuning into the JMU Sports News Podcast presented by Bet Online and 3-notched. Exclusive beer drop Friday, sweet potato casserole. Everyone's been clamoring for it. It's here, folks. Until next week.